All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into Tailwind CSS. You've probably heard of it. It's this massively popular utility-first CSS framework that's honestly completely changed how a ton of developers think about styling websites. So what's the big deal? Well, let's start with the problem it was actually built to solve.
Okay, so it all kicks off with a problem that, well, if you're a web developer, you know this pain. CSS can be tough, right? Design is tough, but just naming your CSS classes in a way that makes sense and doesn't fall apart later on, as our source says here, sometimes that feels pretty much impossible.
For decades, the answer from frameworks was always the same. Here are some big pre-styled components, like a pre-made button or a card. But Tailwind comes along and asks a totally different question. What if the answer wasn't bigger components, but way, way smaller pieces? So to really get what makes Tailwind so different, we first have to talk about that traditional approach. This is the world of component-based frameworks, and it's what most of us were used to for a long, long time. Yeah, so think about frameworks like Bootstrap or Material. They give you a class like, say, .btn or .card. You pop that into your HTML, and boom, you get a fully styled component. It's super convenient for sure, but it can also feel kind of limiting, You end up fighting the framework styles instead of building your own thing. Okay, now let's flip the script and look at Tailwind's philosophy. It's a completely different way of thinking. Instead of those high-level components, it's all about low-level utilities. And this slide just nails the difference perfectly. The old way, you have one big abstract class, like card. With Tailwind, you build that card by composing a style from all these tiny descriptive classes. You're literally describing what the element looks like right there in the HTML. And there are hundreds of these little utility classes. Flex makes it a flexbox, which is how we handle modern layouts. P6 adds some padding. M4 adds a margin. Every single class does just one thing. You just combine them like Lego bricks to build literally any design you can think of. But here's where it gets really powerful. It's not just about the static styles. It's about applying them conditionally. Need a different layout on a large screen? No problem. Just add a prefix like LG-. Want the color to change when you hover over it? Just add the hover dash prefix. This super simple system makes building complex, responsive UIs incredibly fast. Of course, this approach isn't perfect, and it's definitely not without its critics. And probably the most common complaint you'll hear about Tailwind is aimed right at how the HTML ends up looking. Yeah, our source here doesn't mince words. That super long string of utility classes, it can look messy. It can be hard to read, especially when your components get really complex. And you know what? It's a totally valid critique that developers have to deal with. So that brings up the big question, right? As your UI gets more complicated, you're going to be repeating these long strings of classes all over the place. So how do you manage that? How do you keep your code from becoming a duplicated, unreadable mess? Well, the Tailwind ecosystem has two main ways to solve this. First, if you're already using a JavaScript framework, think React, Vue, Svelte, you just wrap up that long string of classes inside a reusable component. Easy. The second solution is a cool feature called @apply. This lets you go into your CSS file and group a whole bunch of utilities into one clean class name, like .btn primary, that you can then reuse wherever you want. Okay, let's move on to the next big concern that a lot of developers have: performance. I mean, with thousands of utility classes available, isn't the final CSS file just massive? And hey, out of the box, you'd be right to worry. The full development version of Tailwind CSS is over 3,500 kilobytes. That sounds absolutely huge. And yeah, that would be a complete disaster for your page load times. But that's not the whole story. The real magic happens when you build your site for production. Tailwind has this amazing built-in process that scans all of your HTML, all of your JavaScript, and it intelligently removes every single CSS class you didn't actually use. This process is called purging. And what it means is that even though you had this giant library of thousands of utilities to work with during development, your final production CSS file often ends up being just a few kilobytes small. It only contains the styles you actually used. The result? Almost zero dead code and lightning-fast page loads.
All right, so we've tackled the common concerns. Now we get to the real heart of it, the reason so many developers absolutely love this framework, the day-to-day experience of actually building with it. A totally fair question to ask is, who on earth has time to memorize hundreds of these class names? Like P6 or Shadow LG or TextBlue 500. It seems impossible. But the answer is, you don't have to.
This is where Tailwind really, really shines. It's the tooling. If you're using an editor like VS Code, you get this incredible, intelligent autocomplete that suggests every single class as you type. And if you ever forget what a class does, you just hover your mouse over it and it shows you the exact CSS it generates. It makes building stuff feel so fast and fluid. And this really gets to the ultimate payoff. Tailwind kind of lives in this perfect sweet spot. It gives you way more creative freedom than a rigid framework like Bootstrap, but it also gives you more structure and consistency than just writing plain CSS from scratch. In a way, it lets you build your own custom design system as you go, and that is incredibly powerful. All of which leaves us with one final big question. With this unique utility-first approach, its amazing tooling, and its intense focus on the developer experience, is this becoming the new standard for how we build for the web? Only time will tell, but its impact is already impossible to ignore.